otherwise known as inflation. So today, what are we going to do? We're going to firstly be talking about the main measure of inflation, which is called the Consumer Price Index. So this is also known by the, what is that, an acronym? Something. That, we're going to talk about how it's constructed, and we're going to use it to calculate the inflation rate. Secondly, we're going to go ahead and show why this is useful. So we're going to show some examples of how the CPI is used to adjust the dollar amounts. So that we can eliminate the effects of inflation, the rise in the price levels. Because what we really want at the end of the day is we want to look at economic activity. And inflation is going to get in the way. It's going to confound us looking clearly at just economic activity. We're going to discuss the fact that, like all models in economics, there are some drawbacks. So there's two important biases. In the CPI. So we'll talk about those. We will distinguish between, and then lastly, there's kind of a subpoint in there that we'll get over. So lastly, we're going to talk about the connection among inflation and interest rates. So there's a couple different types of interest rates that we will talk about. Kind of hard to talk about them until we understand inflation. All right, so the first thing, what is this CPI? So the CPI is a measure of the cost of living during some period. So just like with the GDP is a measure of economic activity over some period. The CPI is a measure of the cost of living. So it's a measure of the prices of things. So the CPI measures the cost of a standard basket of goods and services in a given year and they're going to do this relative to the cost of the exact same basket of goods in some other past year, which we're going to call the base year. So at the end of the day, we need some kind of benchmark to compare, And so we usually pick some year, 1990, 2000, 2010, whatever the case may be. So this base year changes periodically. You know, in a few years, it'll probably be 2020. That'll be the base year. So let's go ahead and do an example of calculating the CPI. So we're going to have the monthly costs in 2015 and 2020. And we're going to have a basket of goods and services. So we're going to have rent in a 2-bedroom apartment. So this is going to be $750 in 2015 and $945 in 2020. Same good, same size bedroom, but now just 5 years later. We're going to have hamburgers. We're going to have 60 of them. And in 2015, they're going to be at $2 a piece. So 60 times 2 gives us what? 120. In 2020, they're $2.50 each. So that's going to give us $30 more. 60 times 50 cents is 30, right? 30 plus 120 is 150. Fundamental math stuff. Then we're going to have a certain amount of monthly movie tickets that we're assuming that people are purchasing. So we're going to say 10 of them. And in 2015, they were $6 a pop. Gives us $60. In 2020, we've got 10 of them at $7. So that's going to give us what? $70. And then at the end of this, we can add all of this up to figure out our monthly expenditure amount with the same goods and services, right? 750 plus 180 is going to be 930. 945 plus 220 gives us 65. So we would say that this is the base year. And so we would figure out the CPI for 2020 would be equal to whatever that new amount is, 1,165, divided by the base year, 930, and then multiply this whole thing by 100. So the book actually made a mistake, so let me just calculate make sure we get the right one. 1165 divided by 930. Yeah, still the same. So we get a CPI of 1.25. So the other way we can say this is we can say the cost of living in 2020 is 25% higher than in 2015. So just for the sake of illustration, let's go ahead and calculate the CPI for the base year. So the CPI for the base year would be whatever the cost is in that year over whatever the cost was in that base year. So it's just going to give us 1. So the CPI for the base year is always going to be equal to 1. I don't know why this 100 is here. This PowerPoint has a lot of errors in it, so just get rid of this. Get rid of this times 100. Because the CPI is always... well, the BEA, that's why. So let's get rid of the X's and we'll just circle it and talk about it. So the textbook and a lot of other places will not have it, but the BEA, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the folks who gather this data, right? The folks who do the calls and the household visits and figure out, okay, how much of this are you buying? What are you paying? So on and so forth, right? They use a percentage. Sometimes. All right, so we can skip the extra example because it's pretty simple kind of stuff. More definition things. So the CPI, right, the Consumer Price Index is a price index, right? So just what is a price index? More generally, a price index measures the average price at a given quality of goods and services relative to the price of the same goods and services in a base year. So the CPI, right, this is measuring the changes in consumer prices. But there's other types of inflation indices that we will hear mention of in the news and stuff a lot. So let's talk about them real quick. So one of the main ones that we hear about a lot, which is the core inflation rate. So the core inflation rate is essentially, it's a, think about the core of an apple. So we're taking away some of the apple, right? So it is the CPI stripped away, so it doesn't have any energy or food prices. So I'm sure you're wondering, why are we stripping those away? Those are the things that oftentimes are moving, right? And those are the things that make up a large portion of our budget. So we'll talk about that later, talk about the erraticness of oil and really the purpose of these types of indices, right? At the end of the day, these, inflation rate is a price index. It's a measure of the price index. So the other one that we have consuming, right, which is on one side of the equation. And then we also have producing. So you'll hear this one a lot talked about internationally, right? They'll talk about the PPI numbers or whatever for China or for some other country, right? So the producer price index is essentially, it's the cost of producing goods and services. Average cost of producing goods and services. And then lastly, the last one that we might hear about is the import-export price index. So imports, these are all of the things that we buy from abroad, right? So these are goods and services purchased from abroad. And exports are those things that we sell, right? Sold by the US to the rest of the world. So these two things tend to have different prices. They're influenced by exchange rates and other things that are beyond the scope of this class, but just be aware that at the end of the day, they are all just other types of price indices. All right, so now let's get to that wide guy. Inflation. Inflation. So inflation is nothing more, so it's a rate, number one. And it's really nothing more than the annual percentage change in the price level. So if we're given some different CPIs over time, so if we have year and some CPIs, and if we're using this one as our first one, then how do we go ahead and calculate our inflation rate for the 2016 year? So how do we calculate percentage changes? Right? This is middle school stuff, right? A percentage change is my new minus my old over my old times 100 because it's a percent. So to get my inflation rate for 2016, I would just take 240, I would subtract 237, divide by 237, and then multiply that whole jazz by 100. That would give me 1.3%, which makes sense given that, 2.4 is not that much more than 2.37. So, why do we care about this stuff? Well, this stuff can tell us things that production numbers can't. So there's different phenomena in economies over time. And so let's travel back to the Roaring 20s. So what happened 1929, 1930, right? The start of the Great Depression. So we know that economic output fell. We know that unemployment increased to near 25%. we know that if stocks lost a third of their value. But what happened to the price level? What happened to the price level? So we can use the consumer price index to figure that out. So what do we see happening? We see that it's falling every time, right? And so if we were to calculate the inflation rate over here, we would end up with 0.167 minus 0.171 over 0.167 times 100, right? This would give me a negative number. This would give me negative 2.3%. What's up with that? Well, the price level is falling. So when an economy gets really hard hit, people don't have money to buy stuff. So what happens when people don't have money to buy stuff? What are you going to do? You're going to fire sale, right? You're going to lower the price on it so that half a loaf is better than none. But what happens when you end up having to lower the prices on a bunch of your stuff? Well, then you got to let people go. You got to fire people. Well, then now there are more people that don't have money to buy the stuff, right? So this is the vicious spiral, that downward spiral that economies can undergo, and that happened in the Great Depression. And you know, the thinking was at the time that, you know, creative destruction, just let the firms die and let the distressed assets and all the distressed property be bought up by other people, and you know, let innovation and entrepreneurship you know, sow the seeds of a new America tomorrow, right? But it wasn't happening. There was just more and more and more unemployment, more and more of the stock market value falling, the output numbers falling, right? And it was a global phenomenon, right? We talked about that. You know, Germany experienced a similar kind of thing, right? And so every year the prices were falling, right? And so in 1931 we had a fall so it started out, you know, not too bad, right? And then it was a really propitious fall, right, in terms of 9%, then near 10%. Didn't slow down until 1933. But even then, it was still negative. We still had negative 5.1%. So all of these kind of negative rates these are what's called deflation. Yes?
Like, where did you get those, like, numbers?
They're from the textbook.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I mean, like...
I was just wondering if you were, like, converting them. I was like, what? So, I just got
Oh, you mean like this 9%?
Yeah.
Here, let's do it real quick. So we take this, so we take 0.152, we subtract 0.167, and then we divide it by 0.152, and then we multiply by 100. Yeah, the book gave them to me, so yeah, I didn't just do them on the fly. That'd be crazy. Like, well, what am I doing here, right? Yeah, for real. Turns out I'm secretly a billionaire. Yeah. I'll keep the air of mystery. So at the end of the day, why do we care about this stuff, right? Well, we care about this stuff because we can be deceived by the production numbers. We can be deceived by just the raw value of things, because these prices, they change, they go up, they go down, right? For the most part, a healthy economy, they're going to go up 2 to 3% every year. So that's just kind of a standard rule that you don't need to know, but it's just like, yeah. What's up?
I'm just wondering, why did you divide it by 0.152 instead of 0.1?
Oh, you're right. Absolutely. Yes, it should be 0.167. Thank you. I just got confused because it's larger, or because it's backwards. Yeah, so it's always bilingual. Thank you so much. Yep, very good. So the amounts that we get when we are paid and things like that, when we go to Walmart and we buy stuff, the things that we're looking at, those are all nominal amounts. So nominal quantity is measured in terms of its current dollar value. So you'll also hear it called current. So you'll hear, like, they'll be constant in current dollars. So current dollars are nominal dollars. I can't tell you how many times I've Googled that. I just can't seem to remember it. And Google knows immediately as soon as I'm like typing, like, what is the difference between current? It's like current and constant. I got you. I know exactly what you need. It brings me to the BIS site every single time. The Bureau of, or the BEA site, sorry. So a real quantity is measured in physical terms. So real quantity, these are the quantities of goods and services, the ones that we care about. So when we are comparing over time, sorry, you're always going to use the real quantities. Because if you don't use the real quantities, then you're actually looking at what's happening both to price level and to economic activity at the same time. So when we take something from a nominal to a real value, that's called deflating it. So just like, deflating a balloon or a tire, deflating a nominal quantity converts it to a real quantity. So how do we deflate stuff? Well, we take the nominal quantity and we divide it by the price index. So, and that'll give us the real. So let's go ahead and do a problem, make things a lot clearer. I tend to do that. So the question that we are seeking to answer is, can a family buy more with a $40,000 income in 2015 compared to $44,000 in 2020. So the way that we figure this out, we have to deflate the nominal income in one or both of the years. So we're going to use 2015 as the base year, because why? Then half of my job's done for me, right? The CPI in 2015 is equal to 1. So how do I get my CPI for 2020? Well, it's going to be equal to some price basket, price level, in 2020 divided by some price level in 2015. So we're given what it is. We don't need to calculate it this time. We're told that it's 1.25. I think it's the same numbers as before. So 1.25 with 2015 as the base. So now we have all of the elements, right? In terms of to get this real, we need these two things. Well, now we have them. We have a price index for both years, and we have a nominal quantity for both years. So now we can convert these to the real quantities and actually compare them. So let's go ahead and do that. So we've got year, we've got nominal income, we've got CPI, and then we'll put the real income over here. So obviously 2015, 2020, 40K, 44K, 1.00, 1.25. Usually round the CPI to the 100th decimal place, just by default. And so we know what's the formula. Real income is equal to nominal income divided by CPI. So this is going to be 40K divided by 1.0. Anything divided by 1 just gives us whatever that amount is, right? So 40K. This one's going to be a little bit more tricky, right? 44K divided by 1.25 is going to give us 35,200. So we can say 35.2K. So we actually find that the $4,000 raise isn't more money than you were making in 2015 when we account for the price changes. So what do we figure out? That the $40,000 has what we call greater purchasing power. What do we mean by purchasing power? Well, just that. It's the power to purchase a specific amount of goods and services. So what do we find? We find that over time, inflation erodes your purchasing power of your savings and of your nominal income, right? That's why we have to fight for raises. That's why we have to, go and shop for different jobs. That's why we have to, make sure that we're trained, we have the right degree, we have the right skill set, right? So that we can be at the cutting edge of whatever discipline we want and get paid those good bucks. So when we talk about our wage and we talk about wages over time, we wanted to be talking about, just as before when we were talking about, comparing anything, we want to talk about real quantities rather than nominal quantities, right? So we're going to want to talk about our real wage rather than our nominal wage. So our nominal wage, that's the thing that we get in the paycheck. That's the thing that shows up in our bank account, right? That's the thing that's on the pay stub. But our real wage is the nominal wage divided by the price index and so it's the wage paid to the worker in terms of, here's again that word, purchasing power. And so when we look at something like, we talk about, how offshoring has influenced, U.S. steel mills and other kind of production and things like that, right? Well, the way to really look at that is we can look at the real wage and we can see how those people are doing, right? So U.S. production worker wages. We're going to use 1982 to 84 as the base year. So sometimes it's not 1 year, but it's a few years that they average out. And so let's go ahead and take a look. Our average nominal wage in 1970 for production workers was $3.40. But what was our price index at that time, right? What was our consumer price index? It was 0.388. Ah, I broke my own rule about the 100th place. Alrighty, we go to the 1000th place. It's like the next one. And so how do we get our real average wage? We divide the nominal wage by the CPI. So this is going to be equal to 340 divided by 0.388. Anytime you divide by a fraction or a number that's less than 1, what's going to happen? The numerator is going to get bigger, right? So we end up with a number that's larger than 3.40. It ends up being 8.76. And then we fast forward to 2019, where the nominal average wage for U.S. production workers is $23.51. So upon first blush, seems like they're doing way better, but we know that the price levels have changed a lot in the 50 years that it's been since 1970, right? The CPI, when we use 1982 to 84 as a base year, the CPI for 2019 is 2.5 times that base year. So things are 2.5 times as expensive in 2019 as they were in 1982-84. How expensive were things in 1970 as compared to 1982 or 84? A little bit more than a third as expensive, right? A little bit more than a third as expensive. And so in order to calculate our real average wage in 2019, we're going to do the same thing as what we did in 1970. And we're going to take 23.51, we're going to divide that by 2.56, and we're going to end up with a real wage of $9.18. So what have we found? What can we say? Well, the real wages have stayed roughly the same. Despite the fact that nominal wages increased by a factor by almost seven times. So if we were to look at this graphically, we end up with a nominal wage. It starts off at $2, ends up at 22, and we end up with a real wage, starts off at 8. Oh. Come on, little guy, you can do it. Hangs out around there. All right, so what can we do to kind of account for or battle the CPI, right? What can we do to make sure that, or inflation, right, that wide guy? Well, we're not going to get into the advanced kind of modern monetary theory or any of that kind of stuff. But one thing that we can do, and one thing that we really should be doing more of, is something called indexing. So indexing is something that we don't really care about right now, but it's something we probably will when we get older and we are getting, government benefits and things like that, right? So indexing. What is indexing? Sorry. So this is when there are automatic adjustments to the nominal quantity each period by the specific percentage increase in a specified price index. So what does indexing do? It prevents your purchasing power from being eroded by inflation. And so, for instance, Social Security payments, right? If prices increase 3% in some year, Social Security recipients get 3% more. So there's no action by Congress or any of the other government branches required. And depending on different jobs and things like that, right? If you move somewhere, or if you have some long-term kind of contract, right? There's indexing in labor contracts. Not really, though. Most of the time, it's just constant negotiations. And when you're going into negotiations, you talk about, well, look, the cost of living has increased by this, so I need a raise of at least that much. And you're increasing the price of the final product, and I know my productivity hasn't decreased at all. In fact, it's probably increased. So on and so forth, right? So something that does need action by Congress, and something that isn't indexed and can end up having some bad side effects, is the minimum wage. So controversial minimum wage. Also a good song by the Expendables. So Congress sets the national minimum wage, but they set it in nominal terms. It's like they never took an econ class. So it takes publicized debate for there to be periodic increases. Almost all economists agree that indexing, just like we do with Social Security, would be simpler and less controversial but it appears that politicians benefit from the debate. So having an actual solution that would take that debate away from them, it's probably not going to happen anytime soon. So the nominal minimum wage has increased steeply over the years, steeply and periodically, right? But who cares? Who cares about the nominal, right? We know we're not going to be tricked by that. We know that the real deal is the real minimum wage, especially for those that are on the lower part of the income distribution, right? Those are the people that having to, they're living paycheck to paycheck. They're having to spend all of their paycheck on goods and services. Compare that to people that are making over $100,000, right? They're only spending maybe half of their paycheck or a quarter of their paycheck on their rent and their food and things like that, right? And then they're putting the rest away in savings and other, boats and other kinds of stuff. I don't know. So the real minimum wage, right, has decreased by almost 30%. Why did I do a dollar sign? Trying to rush to get out of here. Get out of here. Since 1970. And so that's why you'll see in some states, right, they have their own state minimum wage because that real minimum wage, the real federal minimum wage is quite lacking. All right, that's all for today. We'll pick up here in class on Wednesday. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. I'll throw this up on YouTube's. We'll finish chapter 6 and we'll do chapter 7 on Wednesday.